Welcome to Amplifying Recruitment. In this episode, I'm joined by recruitment lawyer Barry Cullen. If you've ever had an issue with backdoor hires, if you've ever questioned your restricted covenant or that of your staff, if you're thinking about exiting a business or thinking about anything else from a legal perspective within the world of recruitment, you're going to absolutely love this episode. Barry, welcome to Amplifying Recruitment.
Thanks for having me here.
For anyone that doesn't know you, and I think most people listening to this will know you, could you do like a 30-second intro?
30-second me. So I'm Barry Cullen. I'm a solicitor, founder at a law firm called RecLaw. RecLaw are lawyers to the recruitment industry. Personally, I'm a failed recruiter. So I was a C++ Java contract recruiter back in the heady days of .com bubble. Then I became a year 2K testing recruiter overnight when the .com bubble burst. And then when the 1st of January came around and the planes didn't fall out of the sky, I came to realise I wasn't very good at recruitment. It was the markets that had carried me. So I had to go and get a proper job. And the proper job happened to be a lawyer. But you think you get out of the industry, but you get dragged straight back into it.
Yeah.
All my mates were recruiters still, and therefore all the phone calls were recruitment-related legal issues. It took me quite a long time to realise that was a niche to sort of focus on. But that's what we've done, and that's why we are what we're doing now.
So the first time I heard your name, I heard your name as Backdoor Barry.
Yeah.
Is that still a thing?
Yeah. So when I started out, I tried to give nicknames. I was trying to push Barry the Bat. I was trying to push Barry the Lawyer. There's sort of like little handles that you could use. But the alliteration of Backdoor Barry, because most of the work that I was doing at the time was backdoor fee disputes, it just was too perfect. And a mate of mine, Louis, really big in the branding world, he said, mate, you just got to lean into it. It might be a bit embarrassing, but lean into it, make a load of money out of it, and then eventually you can start to position the firm rather than you as being the center point. But at that point in time, it was very much about me.
Yeah, okay. So on that then, so what actually... Is this still lots of your work, like backdoor fee disputes, right?
Yeah, well, fee disputes and debt recovery more broadly, we've got a whole team designated to that area. So I would say revenue-wise, it's probably a good 60% of our revenue is still in relation to fee disputes and debt recovery for recruiters.
And what actually counts as a backdoor, like legally speaking, what counts as a backdoor hire?
Yeah, well, legally speaking, I'm not sure there's actually a legal term for it, but colloquially what we mean by it is the idea that a recruiter has introduced a candidate to a client, and at some point during the process, either on CV submission or after some interviews, the client says the candidate's not for them. And then a few months later, the recruiter finds out that the client has effectively taken them in through the back door, to take them into the office for work without telling the recruiter about it. That's generally what we mean by backdoor hire. Some people call it snake fees, lost fees. There's loads of other phrases that people use for it, but backdoor hiring seems to be one that sticks.
And I've heard you call it theft in a suit. Is it like how do the courts actually view that? Like what are they looking for? I think this would be useful for a lot of people listening. Yeah. Like, what are they looking for to go, yeah, no, actually, you are entitled to a fee, or no, you've got no chance there? What are the key things?
Broadly, but no two cases are ever quite the same. But broadly, as the starting point, they want to see that there's a contract in place. They want to see that the introduction was made.
So when you say a contract in place, do you mean what we call terms of business?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And I'm not talking, signed in blood, but there needs to be the client needs to be at least put on notice of the recruiter's terms and then acted in accordance with them. So that's what we call deemed acceptance. So that's a starting point. There is a clear contract between the parties, and then that the recruiter has provided the service, being the introduction, and then ultimately that the client has engaged that candidate within the fee period. That's the starting point. You may then come up with arguments of, there was no contract, or we didn't engage the candidate, or there was another recruiter involved, or, his mum's auntie's dog walker's mate introduced him. We get all sorts of arguments.
What's the maddest excuse you've heard?
We didn't know. I love this one. We didn't know it was the same person. And give you a bit of background. Our client had introduced the candidate on the Thursday, CV, telephone interview on the Friday, face-to-face interview on the Monday, face-to-face in the office, old school, before COVID. And then a week later, they allegedly got a direct application, and then they interviewed him again, same hiring manager, same HR, same people in the interview, and they claimed that they didn't realise it was the same person. So it was
no one said it.
It was like, what, did he wore silly glasses and a moustache or something to cover up his identity? It just wasn't very believable. But we get every excuse under the sun.
And so what's your I suppose what's your process? I'm a recruiter. I phone you. I go, someone snaked me.
Yeah.
They've done a backdoor. Like what's your process?
Yeah,
Again?
sure. So again, no two cases the same, but broadly, they'll have a conversation with us. We'll try and talk them through, seeing whether we can give them some tips on how to fix it themselves. Because ultimately, if they can often fix it themselves, they don't have to pay us. That's good for them. And then longer term, we can have a client that's going to work with us a lot. That's always really happy to try to give that sort of early stage advice. But if they do need us in a more formal footing, we'll obviously discuss terms, get our terms in place because we're important. We make sure we cover that bit off. And then depending on the case, we will take a different approach to how we contact the client. So it might be that actually it's better for us to work in the background. So often we'll, train the recruiter on, right, in your next call with a client, say this, say that, say the other, or don't say this, don't say that. Or we might draft emails for the recruiter to copy and paste, in their own voice, so that the other side, the client doesn't even know there's a lawyer involved, because that way you've got a really good chance of keeping the client relationship and getting paid. But then in other cases, we might need to come out in the open. And sometimes that's done on a quite friendly basis. We might approach them and say, look, we understand there's a bit of a dispute here. We're just here to try to resolve it. We don't really want to get into a big fight over it. And then we have a conversation, and we call it re-educating the end client on why they owe the money. Or we might have to be a little bit firmer, all the way through to being somewhat more nuclear and, jumping down their throats pretty quickly with insolvency threats and court threats and what have you. And it just depends on so many factors as to what approach to take, because it's a bit like recruitment. You can't just assume the first time you pick up a phone to a client and you try and sell something to them, you're not listening to what the symptom is or what the problem they've got that you're then going to provide a solution to. And much the same way in legal disputes, you don't just launch in with, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. You need to listen to what their problems are. If I give you a case in point, we had a case last year. Our client was owed something like £18,000, thereabouts, including VAT. And they'd been having like 8-9 months of trouble trying to get this invoice paid. They got us instructed. On this occasion, we sent a relatively friendly email to their head of HR, who then arranged a call with me. I had a discussion with her, and she was really open really early on that she was actually quite embarrassed by the situation, because she felt that actually the recruiter should have been getting paid. But we were able to identify in the call that the problem wasn't her, it was the CEO, because there had been a previous placement who had gone through rebate and about a month later had dropped out. And the CEO was annoyed that this was effectively a backfill, but because the rebate had expired, the recruiter was getting paid again for the backfill, and didn't want to sign off on the invoice. So we were just able to sort of talk around the edges of that, and then able to identify from the HR director that actually she did have sign-off powers up to a certain level, but she couldn't sign off over £10,000. So anything up to that, she could sign off. Anything over that, she had to get CEO sign-off. So we came up with a solution, which was a really simple one, which was, well, if we invoice you to £9,000, you can sign both of those off, can't you? And she was like, yeah, of course, but can you do me a favour and just date them a week apart so it's not so obvious? Like, yeah, absolutely fine. So in a phone call, because you don't go in, breaking knees straight away, you just go in to find out what the problem is, and then you're identifying what the problem is, and then you're solving that problem, which is a sales process, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what has to happen for you to go nuclear? Because this is the stuff I love. Like you post a lot on LinkedIn, right? Like you said it when we were talking off camera, that you're pretty noisy, and that's the stuff that I get a little bit excited about.
Well, look, if we come into it quite far down the line, so often, there's already a dispute, so let's talk about how a recruiter would normally deal with it. A lot of recruiters, unfortunately, let their emotions take over in this situation, because they think, I've pulled the job, I've worked the job, I've got the candidate forward, I've prepped them, I've done all the interviews, I've got them through a really good fast stage, and now all of a sudden they're working there and I've not got paid. And they put 2 and 2 together and come up with 9, and they assume that somebody's gone out of their way to rip them off. So the first thing they do is pick up the phone to the candidate and, not necessarily F and blind, but can't believe you did that to me. How would you do that? I've done all this work for you. Yeah. And then they bang an invoice over to the client and say, if this isn't paid in 7 days, we're going to sue you. It's like, okay, you've just hit the big red nuclear button, without taking the opportunity to have a breath. Realise the candidate's probably your best ambassador here, because they will realise that you put a lot of work in, and also a really good source of information. So you can find out from them, how did they actually get the job? What process was there? Was there another recruiter? Did the client reach out to them directly? But if you go and jump down their throats, they're going to defend themselves and they're not going to talk to you anymore. And likewise, if you go to the client and say, pay in 7 days or I'm going to sue you, there's no way back. You can't unpress the big red nuclear button, but you can always build up to it. So going in on actual information finding first, a bit like what I was talking a minute ago. Find out what the problem was, find out what the symptom was, find out before they entrench and before they all start sort of protecting their position. Find out as much information as you can to see whether you are actually entitled to a fee, and then approach it accordingly.
And so just back to that question again then. So what has to, at what point do you go, right, do you know what? Like, we just need to go.
Yeah.
We need to hit the button.
It's already a big dispute, so the opportunity for that sort of backdoor diplomacy or the very friendly approach is already gone. There's already a big argument in place, and we have a good enough case. Sometimes if we're a little bit weaker, then that might be an opportunity to go, okay, we smell weakness, we smell blood in the water here. So the opportunity for friendly has gone, so we have to go in with a much more aggressive approach. And a much more aggressive approach might look like an email from us to say, you owe the money, pay it or don't pay it, but we're going to come and take it. And that is often enough to make them go, okay, just that contact from us, it's gone external. It's a proper law firm now, rather than just somebody in your business. And that's often enough to make them go, okay, let's do something. Yeah. Or it might not be. And then the goal then is, it's like the Mike Tyson approach to litigation. You just keep punching and punching and punching, get them on the ropes, and then lean in and bite their ear off as well.
You said something a second ago. You said to find out if they're entitled to a fee. Where's how many of these do you get that come over to you guys where you're like, do you know what? You haven't got a leg to stand on, or actually you haven't done the things that you need to do for us to enforce this?
I'm not sure I've ever looked at the stats on that, but I would say probably about 1 in 4.
Okay.
About 1 in 4 where we look at it and say, do you know what? You've not got terms in place. You've not actually followed the terms. It might be that they've agreed client-side terms to an RPO and an MSP or what have you, and they've not actually followed the terms. It might, for example, a lot of MSP RPOs and big corporates, they want you to make an introduction via a portal or what have you, or always via talent. And if you've agreed to that, then that's what you have to do.
And can it be as simple as that it says you go via talent, you've gone direct to line, and therefore... Yeah,
it can be as simple as that, because ultimately, if two businesses have agreed to a contract and a way of working, and then one of your team isn't following that way of working, then it's a fair argument for the end client to say, well, you agreed to do this, you didn't do it, therefore you don't get a fee.
Yeah.
That's why understanding the terms you're agreeing to with clients is so important.
And I can imagine this playing out in, I'm just thinking back, like from my own experience. I worked for a very, very, very large recruitment business, and I would have had no idea what terms were signed. And we had lots of portal and MSP based business. And like, even thinking back, it was a long time ago, but I'd go rogue and go direct to line managers and do things we maybe weren't meant to do because I just didn't know what had been signed. So where does the responsibility? I suppose the responsibility stops with the recruitment business owner. But how should that? I don't know. How do you do that internally? What should that look like internally?
I mean, that's tough. This is contract management, right? The ability to agree a set of terms and then understand the set of terms and ensure everyone that's at delivery level is actually following the sort of playbook in relation to that client. That's a pretty tough thing to do. If you're able on your CRM, you might be able to put some client notes in and say, make it very clear, this client, here's how we make introductions, or this client, here's how we invoice, or this client, here's how we have to do X, Y, Z in accordance with the terms, having something like that in place. So you take them off a mail shop, option, tick them off as you can't mail shot this client, or whatever that might be. It's very sort of down to the individual agency as to how they manage that, but I think the most important thing is understanding it. And too often, recruiters will simply sign off terms without really understanding what they're agreeing to.
Do you think as an industry we should do more to help recruiters understand what the law is? No one ever taught me what any legalities were of the industry. And I think it comes from the fact we're a completely unlicensed, unregulated industry anyway. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you empower people to understand the law and empower people to understand the contracts, then that's only going to make their jobs easier. And also we're in a world now where, back in the 90s, it was, here's a phone, here's a Rolodex, go make some business. Whereas now we've got generations coming through, they expect a bit more training. They expect to be sort of actually a little bit more knowledgeable about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're working. There's a much more considered approach to these things. And that's a really important part of, talent acquisition and retention within the recruitment space these days, is making sure that they often the younger generations, right? But making sure that they can see the actual amount of training that's going into them and why they're working the way they're working. They can be a lot more inquisitive now than they would have been even 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Can I just go back a couple of steps?
Yeah,
You were saying there about maybe introducing someone through the wrong channels, and that's from your 1 in 4 that just you go, no, we can't touch that. You've messed it up. What are the other things that come up that might make you say, do you know what, we can't help you here, or you've not followed due process?
Yeah, it's a number of things, but often one of the biggest disputes we get is like multi-agency disputes.
Okay.
So if there's 2 recruiters who've both introduced the same candidate to the same role, or to the same client, because the court starting point isn't that both recruiters get paid. The court starting point is we need to figure out which recruiter gets paid. And so therefore that becomes a much more fact and evidence heavy situation. And what we often find is that it's the recruiter that's done their job a bit better, has made sure they've got terms in place, have made sure they've followed a process, have made sure they've evidenced it. So much stuff doesn't happen on the CRM, and then I'm asked to go and enforce it. And it's like, well, where's the evidence? Oh, well, there was a phone call, there was a this. It's like, cool. How do we document it? That consultant left 3 years ago. Getting that evidence. It's that idea. The idea of if you're in cycling or running, if it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. In the same way, if it's not on the CRM in recruitment, it didn't happen. So making sure that you've got that and getting yourself through the process as far as possible, because the further you've got through. If you've just got the CV over, but you've not done anything after that, and the other recruiter gets the CV over and is able to book in the interview, arrange the interview, and run the process, that's putting us on the back foot when it comes to trying to convince a judge that the recruiter that only sent the CV, should get paid.
And who is that dispute between then? So if it's recruitment company A, recruitment company B, both people speak to the candidate, both submit the candidate, A does his job really well, and follows up with a phone call, books the interview, all that great stuff. And then this one gets the because he's like, you took my candidate. Does that become a dispute with, like, I would imagine company B goes to the client and go, you owe me a fee. Where does but actually disputes with company A?
It's funny, because what we often get is clients push back and say, well, can you not talk yet? Your client to talk to the other recruiter and figure out between you. But come on. You're sitting in the office, you've basically just done a deal, and another recruiter phones you up and says, can we split the deal? It's like, no. That I've almost never seen that way of approaching it, resolving the matter, because ultimately it's 2 disputes. Recruitment agency A and recruitment agency B both have a dispute with the client over whether they get paid or not. You could theoretically imagine a scenario where, you've got a 3-party claim, because you could have, recruiter B might sue the client over the fee, using your A and B example, and then client might then bring recruiter A in as a party to the proceedings to say, we defend the claim against recruiter B on the basis that they never caused the outcome, but if we're wrong, then we want the money back off recruiter A. Not seen it happen, but theoretically that could happen. Okay,
it's really interesting. Is there anything else that people should look out for?
Just basically do your job right. It's sorry to say it, but normally. Recruitment business owners set up a good business, they get decent terms in place, they set up a good process, and as they grow, they'll get to that point where they can't be as closely involved in every deal, because they're growing and therefore they're getting slightly more remote from the business. And it's at that point where things break down, because you and your mate, and it's often 2 people are setting up agencies together, right? You're very good at what you do. And you run a process really well, but then if you're not training and actually pushing that culture through your business so that they take the same approach that you do, a really solid approach, then as you get bigger, people just start to not quite do it the right way. And unfortunately, it's normally the human that screws up the system.
Are there any warning signs to look out for from, like, this client's going to screw me?
Yeah. I mean, you just smell it a mile off. Clients that the only thing they want to talk about is price.
Yeah.
So you're trying to pitch into them, how much are you charging? Or the other agency charge. It's about value prop, right? It's about, let's actually try and figure out if there's a good relationship here, and that we might be able to add some value. And if we can do that, then let's talk about commercials. Even in our world, any recruiter that gets in touch with me and the first question they ask me is how much do you charge, I say more than you can afford. I'm not for you. I'm not for you. This is not the way a good relationship works between lawyer and client, and much the same way between recruiter and client. If it's all about price, that's a bit of a flag. Yeah. Another major red flag, and I saw somebody posting about this on LinkedIn yesterday, is, oh yeah, just ping me the CV and we'll talk about terms later. Yeah. That's 101 times you do that, 99 of them it's going to be a problem. So those are big issues. There are certain industries which are more prone and more prime. The construction industry is one of them. Really problematic.
Why do you think that is?
So I think, and is my sort of anecdotal view on it rather than the actual necessarily why it happens this way. Certain people do proper jobs, right? And what I mean by a proper job is they pick up tools for a living. They don't just make, in our world, a few phone calls, send a few emails. Like lawyers and recruiters, that's the outside world don't see us as doing proper jobs. And when they do a proper job, and then they run their own business, having been on the tools themselves, they don't recognise the value that a recruiter brings. And their mindset is, well, you only banged over a couple of CVs. Why should you get 15 grand? And they just don't understand that. And because they don't understand it, they'll chance their arm. And they'll try and get away with it more often than not. Not more often than not. That's unfair to sort of call a whole industry. But that's one where we get a lot of work as a result of people just being end clients being a bit brash and going, I'm just not going to pay.
Are there any other industries that stand out?
Legal. Funnily enough.
No way.
Yeah, legal. Because either people are recruiting into big law firms and they take that approach of, I'll just float a CV and see if there's any interest, but without terms and without anything else. And therefore they get themselves into a difficult position.
I suppose, like if you can't pull the wool over their eyes, can you?
Yeah. Well, also, it's less that you can't pull wool over their eyes, and unfortunately quite a lot of law firms are chancers, and they'll go, we can get away with this. And therefore we'll try to, particularly if you're trying to place partners or you're trying to move teams, and your fees are going from 15, 20, 25 grand up to 100, 200, 300 grand plus, then law firms will, unfortunately, often take a chance. And, I'm not saying everybody, obviously, but, there'll be quite a lot of that. Crypto, Wild West, absolutely the Wild West. That's a lot of fun at the moment. And then high finance, again, so, a lot of financial institution, particularly the smaller businesses within that space, there's a lot of that. I'd say they're the ones we see most.
Can I ask, and this is the last question I'll ask on this, but and it just got me thinking about it, what you said about like partners and mergers and all that kind of stuff. With that, well, I know that person. Like, is there any standing there that recruiter sends me a CV and I'm like, but I know this guy. I went to university with him and I had a beer with him last Christmas. I'm not paying you 20 grand for him.
Well, I've got slightly a turn of phrase I can use with recruiters, but I would never use it sort of in my day work, which is I could introduce you to your own mum. If you haven't got her in process, then it's my fee. Yeah, because ultimately that's what you're doing, right? Recruiters are selling speed to knowledge, right? The ability to not have to wait for 9 months while you run your own process to try to find the candidate. But I can tell you today, these are the 3 people that will get the job. Yeah. And if they happen to be one of your mates and you've not cottoned onto that and got in touch with them already, then that's your lookout, not ours.
If your revenue isn't where it should be, it's time to change how your team sells. We've just released the next dates for our flagship business development training, Turn Farmers into Hunters. This is a live in-person training in London where you'll walk away with proven frameworks, ready to use client engagement funnels and conversion skills that you can apply immediately. All the info and sign-up details are in the link in the comments. Brilliant. Okay, this has been really useful. I think people are going to love this. Something else I think people are absolutely going to love. So we were at an event together. It's probably about 18 months ago, and you did a talk, and it was titled, I think, Restrictive Covenants, How to Get Away with It. I think was the title.
It was something along those lines. Yeah.
So, what are the big myths?
Well, there's one myth which I love because I make a lot of money off this myth, and the myth is that post-employment restraints aren't enforceable. I love that myth. I absolutely love it because it means people go out there and just do what they want to do, and then when they get caught with their hands in a cookie jar, then our clients come to us to go and enforce the restraints, and we do it a lot. Yeah, so that's a great myth for us, anyway.
Okay, so what does this and what does that? Just give me an example. What does that typically look like?
So typically, it's going to be somebody that either is getting to a more senior position, might be knocking on the door of an associate director or a director sort of role. They struggling to get through that point in their own agency, and therefore they want to go and set up on their own, or they're frustrated with their own agency and want to set up on their own, or whatever reason they get to the point they want to set up on their own. And instead of going, right, I've backed myself, I'm confident enough, I can go and start from day one, zero, empty desk and build it, they go, I'd rather just take some of this with me. Because in their minds, and you can understand the humanity of this, in their minds, I built this client, I built this relationship, this is my client. And therefore they feel like it's virtuous for them to be able to take that client with them. Whereas what they don't think about is the fact that, well, yeah, you might have built that client, but you built that client having received a salary from my client every month for the last few years, having received commissions, bonuses, a desk, a recruiter license, all the cost of running that business. So the only reason you develop that relationship is because of the investment put in you by your previous boss, ultimately. And therefore you should stay away from that client during the restraint period.
Are we talking about, we're not talking about taking data here though, are we? Like
sometimes that happens too. Yeah. We had a case, it's last year, towards the end of last year, 2 recruiters left our client, set up their own agency together, and our client realized soon afterwards they deleted 22,000 emails. And when I mean deleted, I mean like permanently deleted from the servers, etc. And presumably had taken that data with them. And that was a big problem for our client, as you can imagine. Well, a problem we solved. But
so I'm interested in that. How did you solve that? Or what was the outcome there?
Yeah, so we talk about outcomes first, funnily enough. So it's interesting you raise that, because what we say to the client is, what do you actually want to achieve here? Do you want them to spend the next 6 months of their restraint period looking over their shoulder worrying? Or do you want to send a message to your sales floor? Or do you actually want to protect your business, in the form of an injunction? Or do you actually want to go and recover money in the form of a damages claim? And we need to sort of decide what the outcome is going to be before we then decide the strategy and the direction of travel.
And how often do they just go all of it?
Well, they go all of it, and then I tell them how much it costs, and then they go, "Oh, actually, they're not that important."
Just number 4.
Let's just have some nasty letters. But the ones that are willing to follow through, and they've got their paperwork right, and they've run their business right, and they've run the exit process right, it's not easy to enforce. You need to really know what you're doing. You need to approach it the right way. There's a lot of work involved, but they are very much enforceable.
Okay. With we're talking there about going to, and we see this a lot, right? If someone's, like you said, super biller, why am I paying? Why am I losing all this money? Which is how it's often seemed, isn't it? Like they're keeping 80%, I'm only getting 20. I'll set up on my own. What about if it's consultant moving from one business to another? How does that differ? Go from company A to company B?
So rather than setting up on their own, they're just moving to another agency.
Yeah.
Well, the law's pretty similar. There's no major difference there. But what we would also make sure we do as early as possible is put the new employer on notice of the restraints in the employment contract. Yeah. So because if I'm writing to the new employer as quickly as possible to say, look, you've just hired this person, here's a copy of the restraints in their employment contract so that you're aware of what they're obligated to do and not do. Because then if they breach, I can then accuse the new employer of what we call conspiring or procuring the breach. So I can bring the new employer in as a co-defendant. And I can tell you why. One of the reasons that's really important is often, unfortunately, in the recruitment world, you get a lot of top billers who, they might be top billers, but at the end of the month, they've got no money in the account.
Yeah.
Or they might not have any equity in their house, or their cars might be on lease, or whatever it might be. They're not planners for the future that are building a big asset base. Whereas if I can get the new employer on the hook as well, then I know they've got the money. And that's a really useful thing when it comes to, thinking about the outcome. You don't just want a court order at the end of it. You want a court order and your money back.
And so that's really interesting. So how many of these how much of what you deal with is send a message to the sales floor? Some of it's scare tactics. Some of it's actually, we're going to get money back off of this.
I'd say probably 1 in 10 goes to the point of somebody saying, okay, let's actually do the injunction or actually do the claim. So from inquiry phone call through to that process, I'd say 1 in 10 does it, which isn't high enough in my view. People should be firmer in protecting their position.
What's the reason you think they're not?
Uncertainty, discomfort with risk. It's funny, recruiters, they run a business where everything is about outcomes, but yet a lot of them will fear the risk of the uncertainty of an outcome of a court claim. Because we're talking about decent amounts of money going into it. There's a decent amount of risk. It's a distraction from your day job as well. People underestimate the amount of management time that's involved in something like that. And therefore they think, oh, a couple of letters is going to do it. But funnily enough, often a couple of letters isn't enough to make somebody on the other side turn around and go, oh yeah, here's your 40 grand. Here's your 100 grand. You know, you have to actually sweat it out of them. You know, and sometimes that involves going to court. Yeah, so I think that's one of the main things, and then the cost. Even though you will normally get that money back, but it's a big investment.
Yeah, it's not no win, no fee, is it?
No, not the sort of thing you can do on no win, no fee.
Just to be really clear.
Yeah.
I said there about taking data. I genuinely don't know the answer to this at all. Like, what's the deal with LinkedIn? If I work for a business for 5 years, and during that 5 years I cultivate this amazing LinkedIn network, do I own that, or does the business own that?
So this is one of those things which is really grey and really interesting, and you never want a lawyer to say it's interesting, right? Okay. Because interesting means expensive. What you want a lawyer to say is this is boring, it's vanilla, it's obvious. Yeah, okay. Because unfortunately, we've not yet got to the point where there's been a Court of Appeal or Supreme Court decision on exactly this point. And therefore, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of lawyers arguing one side or the other. The closest I can bring it to is a case from, I think it was Australia or New Zealand, so it's a Commonwealth case, which has some impact on the law here. It's what we call persuasive, and it's actually quite a dated case, which involved a salesperson and their little black book, and they had their own black book, which they'd bought, and they'd been writing all the client contacts, etc., into their book, and there was an argument there over, well, I own the book, and the employer say, well, I own the data in the book. And we're left in that sort of, wisdom of Solomon world of what do we do now?
Yeah.
And the judge in that case said, well, that's absolutely fine. You hand the book over. The employer gets to take a copy of all the data and redact it. So a big black pen over everything. And then you can have your book back afterwards. And that's the closest analogy we can find so far, which is, yes, it might be your account. Yeah, but you've built that using confidential information of the employer, and therefore it should be removed while you keep your account. There's a lot of uncertainty here. There's interplay with LinkedIn's terms, because LinkedIn's terms say that the individual user, the recruiter in this case, if they're using a standard license, it's their data. Well, it's not their data, but they're the ones that have the right to access it, and they're not allowed to share it with other people. But then once you start to use recruiter licenses, etc., then the terms of business change there as to who has ownership over those bits of data. Yeah, so it's uncertain. There's this there's a joke, lawyer joke, right? Which the idea that this woman goes to her doctor and says to the doctor, you're there for their blood test results, and the doctor, she says to the woman, are you an optimist? Do you want the good news first, or do you want the bad news first? And the patient says, well, I am an optimist, so I'll have the good news first. And the doctor, she says to the woman, well, the good news is we're going to name a new disease after you. And much in the same way in the law, there will be a point in time where somebody takes a case about this all the way up to the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, and the only good outcome for them will be they'll get their name on a bit of casework, on a bit of case law, but it will cost a lot of money and it'll go through a lot of stress to get there. I think getting your terms nailed, your employment contracts nailed down on this piece is really important, because if you have it very clear in your employment contract what happens to any social media contacts, then that makes it a much easier argument, because you can point to the contract and say, this is what you agreed. What we see sometimes is people say, when you join, give us a copy of your connections, and then when you leave, we'll take a copy and just delete all the new ones.
And is that's fully enforceable?
Yeah, well,
that you sit again,
there, subject to that issue that it's grey, but we see that enforced, yes.
Is there, you said earlier there that this is being argued in the legal, is it actually being argued? Like, is it, how far has someone taken this?
So there are cases that have gone as far as a county court or a high court on the point, but they've not gone as far as up to the Court of Appeal. And that's the point we need to get to, where we go, okay, this is actually the law.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why we've got this grey, uncertain area, which is wonderful for lawyers, right? Because we get to argue about it all day long and get paid for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there, and you mentioned there about have your contract in place. Is that the number one mistake business owners make, is not having that stuff clear from in terms of enforcing all of this, not just the LinkedIn bit, but everything else? Is that the number one mistake, or is there other stuff?
Yeah, if you don't have your terms nailed down, you don't have your employment contracts nailed down. If it's a boardroom shareholder dispute, you don't have a shareholders agreement nailed down. So it's very clear at the outset what the rules of engagement are and what happens in different situations. Then ultimately, litigators like me, we get to argue much more. Whereas if there's a very clear contract, there's less of an argument, because you say, well, the contract says this, therefore we must do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's one of those frustrating things for recruiters who don't like spending money, because they don't see this bad thing ever happening to them. So therefore, they might take a sort of legal light approach. Nicking their old employment contract from their old boss, or their terms from somebody else's website, or not having a shareholders agreement because they want to save that bit of money, which I get. Yeah, but at the same time, once your business starts to become worth a lot of money, you need that paperwork in place to make sure you're protecting it.
If we flip this the other way, and now I'm a recruiter, I'm leaving the business,
Yeah.
and I'm going to a competitor, I'm setting up on my own, what advice do you give? Because you must deal with those people as
Yeah,
well.
of
They
course.
come to you and
Yeah.
say, defend me.
Yeah. I don't care.
What's the advice to those people?
So firstly, understand what your restraints are. Yeah. So a lot of people will just look at it and they'll either not understand it, because often the contracts they're quite verbose. There's a lot of words, and all the words make sense, but the actual impact of them doesn't. So understanding what your obligations are, understanding which of your obligations are enforceable and not enforceable. Yeah, because just because the contract says it doesn't necessarily mean that a court's going to enforce it. Yeah. So in the world of restraints, which is what we're talking about now, the idea is that you're not meant to be able to prevent somebody from carrying out their own chosen trade or profession. You can't stop somebody working unless the restraint, the purported restraint, goes no further than is reasonably required to protect a legitimate business interest.
Okay.
That's the law of restraints in a nutshell. Yeah? But there are armies of lawyers who privately educate their children, have second homes in France, and go on wonderful holidays arguing over the meaning of that sentence in relation to particular facts of particular cases. So the point being, know whether they're enforceable or not. Understand what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And then make a really early decision on your risk appetite. Either you're going to take the attitude of, I don't care, let's just deal with it when they come to us. Or you're going to play it safe and not give them any reason to come after you in the first place. And then whatever strategy you decide to go for that and stick to it.
Okay. And is it the chopping and changing of, like, I like that, of like, assess your risk appetite. The people must change their mind once a letter comes through, though.
Yeah. It's the power of a lawyer's letterhead. It's amazing. And this is my point about, we were talking earlier, when you're enforcing it, make a decision on the outcome first. And get them to look over their shoulder for 6 months. That can be a really powerful approach, because if you write the right letters and you make them worry enough, that might be enough to make them behave for 6 months. And that might therefore make them stay away from clients, stay away from candidates for that period of time. And that's what you're looking for, right? It's a fair crack of the whip. When they go, the employer needs a fair crack of the whip to get a new person to take over the desk and build up the relationship with the clients and the candidates before it's open season. And that's what restraints are for, really.
And have you had it where, like, the recruiters come to you and said, look, I've had this letter through, and you then draft one that's like, fuck off, back to the employer, like, none of this is enforceable. Actually, we haven't got...
What, this week or...
So you obviously get this all the time, right?
Yeah, all the time. And also, strategically, one of the games you can play as the prospective defendant is delay. Because if an employer is seeking to enforce restrictive covenants, they're going to court to get an emergency injunction. It's called an interim injunction or an emergency injunction. And if you wait 3 months to go to court to get that injunction, the judge is likely to ask very early on, what sort of emergency took you 3 months to get here? So if you just buy a little bit of time between everything, recruiters have this, make it happen, time kills deals, get on with it sort of attitude. So you have to sort of re-educate them. And in certain situations, actually, just chill. If they write to us on a Monday, we write back on a Wednesday and say, thanks for your letter, we'll get back to you. And then we buy a few more days and buy a few more days, so that every exchange of emails or letters is taking a week to 10 days. By the time you've exchanged 3, 4, 5 letters, you're 2-3 months down the line. That's really taken the wind out of the potential injunction risk. Whereas if you're the employer, you don't want to allow that time. You want to just be on it and on it and on it, really short deadlines, and then stick to them. This idea of, don't be a dog with no teeth. If you're going to make a threat and they don't do what they're told, follow through on what the threat was.
Again, last question on this. If I'm a recruiter sat here listening to this, thinking about going and setting up one day, and tomorrow morning my boss comes in and says, oh, by the way, we never gave you a contract when you started with us a year ago. Here you go, sign this. Where do I sit with that?
Well, you have to think very carefully about what you sign at that point. Think really carefully. We see this quite a lot, where somebody's on a contract, then they might have a restraint dispute within the agency. Then they realise they've got problems with their restrictive covenants, so they then update their contracts and roll those new contracts out, a lot of recruiters might be sitting there going, hang on a second, that's now a lot stronger as a contract. Why should I be signing it? What am I getting out of it? Yeah, so think through your position really carefully. But then also think of the human aspect of that, because if your boss comes to you with a new contract, and as far as they're concerned, you're a lifer and you're going to be in the business forever, and you refuse to sign it, that's an alarm bell, right? It's a red flag as to why not.
Yeah.
I mean, myself, before I ran my own firm, if I worked in other law firms, which I obviously did a number of times, I'd sign the employment contract. I would then go to one of the partners a month or two later and say, by the way, you've got problems with your restraints, you can't really enforce them. And they'd say, oh, would you mind redrafting them for us? I said, of course. So I'd redraft them, they'd push them out to the whole firm, and then a couple of months later, they'd come to me and go, we've got a couple of holdouts. So I was like, oh yeah, who? Well, you're one of them, Barry.
Yeah,
so well, yeah, they're enforceable now. Why would I sign that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting little world.
Oh yeah, it's fun too.
So the other bit that I think must be interesting is exiting a business. Do you do lots of this kind of stuff? So, I suppose there's so many variations of this. Like, what's the stuff that you need in place to cleanly, like from a legal perspective, to cleanly exit a business, whether that's through, I don't know, MBO or trade sale, whatever it might be?
Well, I mean, ideally, at the start, you're setting it up right. So, most businesses, when they're set up, most companies, when they're set up what we call model articles, which is like a standard constitution for a company. Yeah, it's what you get if you buy it off the shelf. If you just go incorporate a new company, bam, you've got model articles. Yeah, they may not be suitable for how you're running your business. Yeah, and likewise, a lot of people will start a business and they'll say, "Oh, we're best mates, everything's going to be wonderful," so they don't get a shareholders agreement. Yeah, and for a litigator, that's manna from heaven. Yeah, because that means at some point in the future they're going to fall out. Yeah, and when they do, one of them's going to have to instruct me, and they're going to have to spend a fortune on litigation. Whereas if they've set it up with the correct articles and set up the correct shareholders agreement, which has the correct provisions for the what ifs, if we fall out, what happens? If there's a deadlock in the business, how do we break that deadlock? Because often it's two people, they're both 50% shareholders and they're the only directors. If they now fall out on the direction of the business is stuck, right? It can't actually make a decision as to which way to go. So having deadlock breaking provisions is really important. And likewise, having those exit, drag and tag options. So if somebody wants to leave the business, there's a mechanism so that they can say, right, I want to leave. Here's the mechanism in the shareholders agreement as to what happens now.
This is a minefield, and I've got some personal experience here. So with that example there, 50-50 shareholders, this isn't my personal experience, but there's two 50-50 shareholders, and they don't have all the things that you just described.
Yeah.
And then one person's going, I want us to do this, I want to do this, we fall out. What actually happens there?
You mediate, so you resolve the issue. You get rid of them, and you figure out what the symptoms are, figure out what the issues are, and then try and find a resolution that works for everybody.
So they come to you for mediation?
Often. Well, one of them will come to us for representation, and then we might propose a mediation with the other side or a round table or whatever it might be. If that doesn't work out, then you can go to court and get a court order where the court breaks the deadlock and decides what should happen. Yeah, but you're massively leaving things in the hands of the courts and the discretion of the court as to what they decide is just and reasonable and fair and how to resolve it. Alternatively, sometimes you get I just drop mic, resign as a director, leave, set up on your own. There's no shareholders agreement, there's no articles, therefore there's no restraints, and therefore you can just go and do what you want, so long as you do it the right way. Drop your directorship first, then go and set up your new business. That happens a lot as well, unfortunately.
Do you see it, well, I'm sure you do see it, where you've maybe got 3 people and these 2 guys are shareholders, and 6 months in, they bring their other mate in, and they go, oh, no, we'll give you a piece of the pie, we'll give you a piece of the pie, and it just never quite materialises, and then they screw him, and he doesn't get his piece of the pie.
Yeah, beware the snake oil salesman, right? I'll give you an EMI scheme. 3-4 years later, they've still not built the EMI scheme. See it all the time, and it becomes a real bone of contention. This person who you've hired for a really good reason, you see them as being a really critical part of your growth, your business. They've got this little niggle, this little frustration where it's like it's never quite happened. They've never quite done it, and that just breeds discontent. And eventually, they're going to go.
And has that person got any leg to stand on?
You can make a lot of arguments, and often successfully, over whether or not the shares have actually been promised, or whether or not they have an equitable interest over the shares. So yes, arguments can be made, but as the incoming person, you should be getting these things written down as clearly as possible. Actually get the shares issued. If it's an option, actually get the option document done beforehand. If it's you're getting shares there and then, make sure they're transferred. Make sure you're signing up to the shareholders agreement. Insist on these things.
Okay. And if we go, so back to kind of the original question, I suppose, of if we're exiting the business, or our plan is to exit the business, whether that's as a twosome, a threesome, whatever it might be, what's the stuff I have to have in place, like really early on? In fact, let me ask a different question. Have you seen deals fall apart because of legal stuff not being in place, like sales fall apart?
Yeah. We almost had a deal fall apart last month. Was it even last month? Yeah, it's early August now. So yeah, last month, because of due diligence. I'd say it's a massively important part. Somebody comes to you and says, "I'm going to buy your business." They're going to look under the hood first, right? They're going to come and look and try to figure out what's good, what's bad. And if you've not set your business up the right way and got the right protections in there, whether it's the right insurances, whether it's the right contracts, whether it's the right finance, accounting, tax structure, whatever it might be, then transactional lawyers are going to come along and beat you up on the price. Their job, you agree a headline price, and then you go into due diligence on tax and due diligence on legal, and the job of the transactional lawyer for the buyer is to beat around the head until the price drops.
Yeah. We've got lots of clients that their end goal is to sell either by MBO, trade sale, whatever it might be. If those people are listening and thinking, do you know what, I'm going to sell in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years time, what should they do now to prep for that?
Make sure you've got the right accountants in place that understand the industry. Make sure you've got the right lawyers in place that understand the industry, and probably get some proper finance brokerage advice. So actual corporate finance advice on what do I need to be doing to make my business as attractive as possible, as defensible as possible when it comes to a due diligence process. So that you want to be able to go into a due diligence process and they say, we need the contract for this. There it is. We need to understand this. There it is. And just have it all ready. So effectively having almost like a Bible of every single bit of information, every single document you might need. So not holidays to Vegas being put through the books, all that sort of stuff. Just need to make sure that's all rock solid. Effectively think about, if you were going to buy a business, what would you want it to look like? And make sure it looks like that.
How far out do you need to do that? Because there'll be lots that are like, what's the last time that we can go to Vegas on the books?
Yeah. Difficult to say, because it's going to depend on the buyers. Some trade buyers who might own a recruitment business might go, oh, well, that's how we do it. So therefore it's less problematic for them. A private equity backed buyer might be a slightly different kettle of fish. They might, because they're just looking for excuses to chip the price. So come on, at least 3-5 years. If you've got dodgy finances going on in that period, that's going to start to be problematic. We are stepping out of my world into tax and accountants now, though, which isn't me.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask you a question about AI. And
we can't do an interview these days without AI being in the chat.
Because I think there'll be lots of people that where they can come and pay you X amount of money to write a letter, that they'll go to ChatGPT and go, write me a letter to tell this little fucker that he needs to give him my data back. So I suppose there's loads of stuff there, but I'm really conscious of time. So a slightly different question. You got a reasonable, like a decent sized company now, right? You're a big team. What are the challenges you have in your business?
So AI is a fun one, actually, because we get a lot of responses from debtors that you read it and it's clearly been drafted by AI. But the problem with any sort of LLM-driven drafting is it's a guessing machine, right? It's a probability machine. It goes, right, what is the most likely thing I need to say here? And it's generally using the whole world of data rather than recruitment-specific law in the UK, in relation to this particular fact matrix. And one of the major problems with AI is that the person using it doesn't know what good looks like. So they say to an AI bot, can you draft me this letter? They get the letter and they go, well, that must be all right.
Looks really good.
Yeah, it looks wonderful, and they don't realise that it's referring to French law, or it's made up case law. It hallucinates case law, and it says this is the law. I said, well, it's not. And if you'd known it was good, then that would have helped. I call it the first draft machine. So you could use it to get yourself from a blank piece of paper to a first draft, but you then need to know what good looks like to make it work. And so we're having a lot of fun with that at the minute. In fact, a lot of recruiters are coming to us with, can we go recover this fee? And we're like, well, we could have done if you didn't have US law here, French law here, and German law here in your terms, because you clearly used a bot to build it. So there's a lot of fun in there. And that's just part of our job these days. Biggest problem for us as a firm is probably we are so well known and so successful in the fee disputes and debt recovery world that nobody realizes that it doesn't stop there. And I'm so noisy that people don't realize it isn't just me. So, we've got a firm of 14 people. We obviously do debt recovery and fee disputes, but we also have an employment team. We have a commercial team. We have a corporate team. So we're there for every part of the recruitment journey for a business owner. But a lot of people don't realize that. So I'd often get people come to me and say, "Oh, Barry, do you know any good employment lawyers?" I'm like, "Yeah, our employment team." Or, "Barry, we're going to get some investment." Or, I was at lunch with a client a while back and they said, "Oh, mate, sorry I couldn't see you last month. We were going through this massive restructure." I'm like, "Oh, yeah. And why didn't you use us?" He's like, "I didn't know you did corporate." So it's a problem that we've caused because, of course, I'm quite a big voice and therefore people hear what I talk about. And historically, I've always talked about debt recovery and fee disputes. We're having to start to bring in other voices within the firm to realise that it's not just me and it's not just fee disputes.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Barry, I'm really conscious of time, and we're at the end, and this has been so insightful, and I'm confident with people listening to this that then want to have a further conversation with you, whether it's about all the other stuff that you guys do, a fee dispute, restricted covenant, whatever it might be. What's the best way for people to get in touch?
You can't miss me on LinkedIn. If you don't see one of my LinkedIn posts a week, then there's something going wrong there. So it's really easy to get in touch with me through that, or jump on our website and get in touch with me through that, or just drop me an email. Barry@reclaw.co.uk. Simple as that.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Barry, thank you so much, mate. It's been
no
an
worries.
absolute pleasure.
I've enjoyed it.
Cheers.